Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The old chenille robe, the faded blue one with the slightly frayed cuffs, was my Saturday morning uniform. It had seen better decades. Much like the woman wearing it, I sometimes joke to myself. I was Eleanor, by the way, 57 years young, a retired librarian, and quite content with my quiet life in a neighborhood where the loudest things were usually the chirping sparrows or the distant hum of Mr. Henderson's lawnmower. This particular Saturday, however, was destined to be a little different. The rain had finally stopped after a week of dreary drizzle, leaving the world outside my window washed clean and glistening. The air, even through the glass, smelled of damp earth and the promise of sunshine later. I was cradling my second cup of coffee, the good strong kind I favored, and gazing out at my small garden, where the rose bushes were looking particularly grateful for the downpour. Drops of water clung to the petals like tiny diamonds. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you earn after years of hustle and bustle, a quiet hum that settles into your bones. I was just debating whether to tackle the crossword puzzle or finally start that new historical novel when I heard it, a soft, hesitant knock on my front door. Now, that was unusual. I wasn't expecting anyone. My daughter, Sarah, lived 2 states away, and my few local friends usually called first. Solicitors rarely bothered with our cul-de-sac, and deliveries were typically left on the porch. I padded softly through the living room, the worn floral carpet familiar beneath my slippers. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked its steady rhythm, a sound as much a part of the house as the scent of old books and lemon polish. Another knock, a little firmer this time, but still gentle. I peeked through the peephole. Standing on my porch was Arthur Jenkins, my neighbor from across the street. Arthur. He'd lived there for, going on 30 years, same as me. We'd always exchanged pleasantries, of course. Waves while getting the mail, a quick good morning if we were both out with the trash cans. But that was the extent of it. He was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly, especially since his wife, Martha, passed away a couple of years ago. He looked a little rumpled, not untidy, just not his usual put-together self. His gray hair, usually neatly combed, was slightly windswept, and he clutched a small, oddly shaped bundle wrapped in a dish towel. My curiosity, a trait I'd never quite managed to retire along with my library card stamp, got the better of me. I undid the chain and opened the door, pulling my robe a little tighter around me, more out of habit than any real concern. "Arthur," I said, trying to sound welcoming, though surprise was probably evident in my voice. "Good morning. Is everything all right?" He blinked, as if surprised to see me too, or perhaps just surprised to find himself standing there. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, seemed to hold a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Nervousness, maybe, or was it sadness? "Eleanor," he began, his voice a bit gravelly, like he hadn't used it much that morning. "I do apologize for disturbing you, especially so early. And, well, you're in your robe." He gestured vaguely, a slight flush rising on his cheeks. I offered a small smile. "Not at all, Arthur. Saturday mornings are robe mornings in this house. Come in, please. You look like you could use a cup of coffee." It was an impulsive offer. I wasn't usually one for impromptu guests, but something about his demeanor, that vulnerable look in his eyes, tugged at me. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking past me into the hallway, then back to my face. That's very kind of you, Eleanor. Thank you. I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," I said, stepping back to widen the doorway. "It's no imposition at all. The coffee's fresh." He shuffled in, bringing with him the scent of damp wool, and something else, something faintly sweet and earthy. He stood a little awkwardly in the small foyer, still holding his bundled parcel. "Please, have a seat in the living room," I said, gesturing towards the archway. "I'll just grab another mug." In the kitchen, as I reached for my favorite hand-painted mug, the one with the cheerful sunflowers, I wondered what this was all about. Arthur Jenkins, on my doorstep, clutching a mystery bundle. It wasn't like him, not at all. My mind raced through the possibilities. Was he ill? Did he need help with something? Martha's passing had hit him hard. We all knew that. He'd become even more reclusive afterwards. I poured the steaming coffee, the rich aroma filling my small kitchen, a comforting, everyday scent in a situation that was starting to feel anything. But I added a little milk to his, remembering vaguely that Martha used to take it that way. It was a small guess, hopeful gesture. When I returned to the living room, he was perched on the edge of my sofa, the one with the slightly faded chintz pattern, looking as though he might bolt at any moment. The dish towel wrapped bundle sat on his lap, undisturbed. The morning light, now a little stronger, filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the rug. He took the mug I offered, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you, Eleanor. This is very good." He took a sip, his eyes closing for a brief moment, as if savoring the warmth. "You always were a good neighbor." I settled into my armchair opposite him, the one I usually curled up in with a book. "So, Arthur," I began gently, "what brings you over this morning? Is everything okay?" He looked down at the bundle in his lap, his fingers tracing the faded pattern on the old cotton dish towel. It was a pale yellow with little embroidered chicks, the kind of thing you'd find in a church bazaar. It looked old, cherished. "Well, yes and no," he said slowly, his gaze still fixed on the towel. I was doing a bit of clearing out. You know, Martha's things. It's taken me a while to get to some of it. His voice caught on her name, just for a second, but it was enough. My heart went out to him. Grief is a long road, and everyone walks it at their own pace. "I understand," I said softly. "Take all the time you need. Arthur, there's no rush with these things." He nodded, still not looking at me. She had so many collections, little things, things that mattered to her. He finally lifted his eyes, and they were filled with a profound sadness, but also a kind of hesitant hope. "And I found something, something well, I think Martha would have wanted you to have it." Me? I was taken aback. Martha. And I were friendly, yes, in that neighborly way. We chatted over the fence about our gardens, exchanged Christmas cards, occasionally lamented the state of the town council. But we weren't close confidants. What could she possibly have wanted me to have? The curiosity I'd felt earlier returned, stronger now, mixed with a growing sense of something else, a kind of tender anticipation. The air in the room seemed to still, the ticking of the grandfather clock growing louder in the silence, marking the seconds as Arthur prepared to unveil his little mystery. The slight tremor in his hands as he began to slowly, carefully unfold the corners of the dish towel told me that whatever lay beneath, it was precious to him, and for some reason, he thought it might become precious to me too. The unexpectedness of it all, the quiet intimacy of this moment with a man I barely knew, here in my living room on a Saturday morning, me in my old robe, him with his carefully wrapped secret. It all felt rather significant, as if a small, unseen door was creaking open. Arthur's fingers, gnarled a little with age, but surprisingly gentle, fumbled slightly with the last fold of the faded yellow dish towel. He took a deep breath, a small, shaky sound in the quiet room. And then he revealed what was inside. It was a plant, a small, rather unassuming succulent, nestled in a simple terracotta pot. Its leaves were a dusty green, tinged with a soft purple at the edges, and they spiraled outwards in a pattern that was surprisingly intricate if you looked closely. It wasn't a showy plant, not like my vibrant roses or the flamboyant hibiscus I babed through the winters. This was a quiet, sturdy little thing. For a moment, I just looked at it, a little perplexed. A plant? This was the treasure Martha wanted me to have. Arthur watched my face, his own expression a mixture of anxiety and hope. It's a Haworthia, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Martha, she loved these. She had a whole collection on the kitchen windowsill. Said they reminded her of stars, the way the leaves grew. He touched one of the leaves very lightly, almost reverently. This one was her favorite. It's not much to look at, I suppose, if you don't know them. I looked closer then, really looked, the way the light caught the slightly translucent tips of the leaves, the perfect geometric progression. There was a subtle beauty to it, a quiet resilience, and knowing it was Martha's favorite, that she tended to it, suddenly imbued it with a different kind of value. Arthur, it's lovely, I said, and I meant it. It wasn't just a plan anymore. It was a connection, a little piece of Martha's life entrusted to me. But why me? Surely there are family members or closer friends. He shook his head, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. Our children, they live so far away, and they have their own busy lives. They wouldn't appreciate it. Not like she did, not like I thought you might. He paused, then continued. Martha always admired your garden. Eleanor, she'd often stand at her window, just looking at your flowers. She said you had a gift, a way with growing things. She said you understood them. My heart warmed at his words. I'd had no idea Martha had paid such close attention or thought so kindly of my humble efforts. We gardeners, we often toil in solitude, our triumphs and failures witnessed mostly by the bees and the butterflies. To know that someone had appreciated it, truly seen it, was a gift in itself. She once told me, Arthur went on, his voice gaining a little strength, that if anything ever happened to her, she'd want her special plants to go to someone who would talk to them. She used to talk to hers, you know? I'd hear her muttering away in the kitchen, telling them about her day. A chuckle escaped him, a rusty sound, but genuine. I smiled back. I'd been known to have a chat with my roses now and then, I admitted, mostly scolding the aphids, but still, this seemed to please him. I knew it, he said, nodding. I just had a feeling. Martha was a good judge of character. He looked at the little succulent again, then carefully, almost ceremoniously, he lifted the pot from the dish towel and held it out to me. So, Eleanor, would you do us the honor? Would you take care of her, little star? My hand reached out, and my fingers closed around the cool, rough clay of the pot. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, solid and reassuring. As I took it from him, our fingers brushed for a fleeting second. His skin was dry, cool, but there was a warmth in the contact, a spark of shared humanity. Arthur, I said, my voice a little thick with emotion, I would be honored. Truly, I'll find the perfect spot for it, somewhere it can get just the right amount of light. And I promise I'll talk to it. A wave of relief washed over his face, smoothing out some of the lines of worry. He let out a long breath, as if he'd been holding it for a very long time. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you. That means more to me than I can say. He sat back against the sofa cushions, then really sat back for the first time since he'd arrived. The tension seemed to drain out of him, leaving him looking older. Yes, but also softer, more at peace. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the ticking clock and the distant chirp of a bird outside. I held the little Haworthia in my lap, its quiet presence a comforting weight. The coffee in our mugs had cooled, but neither of us seemed to notice. The initial awkwardness of his arrival had completely vanished, replaced by a sense of ease. It was strange, really. Here we were, two people who had lived across the street from each other for 3 decades, exchanging little more than polite nods. And now we were sharing something deeply personal, something that spoke of love and loss and the quiet continuity of life. The little plant was a bridge, a conduit for emotions that might otherwise have remained unspoken. She also left this, Arthur said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and handed it to me. It was tucked under the pot. I think it's for the plant. I carefully unfolded it. On it, in a neat, slightly shaky feminine handwriting, were a few simple words. My little star needs morning sun, a gentle hand, and a kind word now. And then, like all of us, tears pricked at my eyes. Martha's words, so simple, so wise. I looked up at Arthur, and he was watching me, his own eyes suspiciously bright. She was a special woman, I said, my voice a little unsteady. Yes, he agreed softly. Yes, she was. He cleared his throat. Well, I should let you get on with your Saturday. I've taken up enough of your time. He made a move to stand. No, Arthur, please, I said, surprising myself again with my own forthrightness. Don't rush off. Your coffee's cold. Let me get us some fresh, hot cups. And perhaps you could tell me a bit more about Martha's other collections. If you feel up to it, of course. I wanted to keep him there a little longer, to nurture this fragile, unexpected connection that had bloomed in my living room as unexpectedly as a desert flower after a rare rain. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his pale blue eyes, then a slow smile spread across his face. It was a lovely smile, one I hadn't seen before. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and for a moment he looked years younger, the shadow of his grief lifting just a little. I'd like that very much, Eleanor, he said. I'd like that very much indeed. And so, on that ordinary Saturday morning, with me still in my old chenille robe, an extraordinary thing began to happen. A neighbor I'd only known from a distance became a friend, and a little star-shaped succulent became a symbol of a connection I hadn't realized how much I'd been missing. The quiet hum of my life was still there, but it was joined by a new, gentle melody. As I poured fresh coffee, the aroma mingling with the scent of the rain-washed air filtering through the slightly open window, a comfortable quiet settled between us again. It wasn't an empty silence, though. It was filled with unspoken things, with the gentle weight of shared understanding. Arthur seemed more relaxed now, his shoulders not quite so hunched, his gaze softer as he looked around my living room. His eyes lingered on the bookshelves that lined one entire wall, crammed with books of every shape and size. Martha would have loved your books, he said, his voice still a little gravelly but warmer now. She was a great reader, mysteries mostly, and biographies. She always said you could learn so much about living from other people's lives. I quite agree, I replied, handing him his steaming mug. That's why I became a librarian, I suppose. So many stories, so many lives, all waiting to be discovered. I settled back into my armchair, cradling the little Haworthia. I'd placed it on the small table beside me, where the morning sun, now breaking decisively through the clouds, could touch its leaves. Did she have a favorite author? Arthur's brow furrowed in thought. Oh, there were so many. But she did have a fondness for Agatha Christie. We used to watch the adaptations on television together. She'd always guess who the murderer was long before the end. Drove me mad sometimes, he added, a soft chuckle escaping him. I laughed too, a woman of sharp intellect. Then, oh, yes, he said, a proud smile touching his lips. Sharp as a tack, my Martha. She kept me on my toes, that's for sure. He took a slow sip of his coffee. It's the quiet I'm still not used to, he confessed, his gaze drifting towards the window. The house feels so empty. We weren't big talkers, not all the time, but there was always her presence. The sound of her humming in the kitchen, or the click of her knitting needles in the evening. I nodded, understanding completely. I'd felt that same echoing silence after my own husband, Robert, passed away 10 years prior. Even though we'd had our share of quiet moments, his absence had created a void that took years to stop aching quite so sharply. The silence can be deafening, can it? I said softly, it's like the house forgets how to breathe properly for a while. Arthur looked at me, his eyes holding a deep, empathetic sorrow. You understand. It wasn't a question, but a statement. I do. I affirmed. Robert, my late husband, he was a jazz musician. Not famous, just played in local clubs. Our house used to be filled with music, scales in the morning, him practicing a new piece in the afternoon, the sound of his saxophone. When that stopped, the silence was awful. It took me a long time to find a new rhythm for the house, for myself. Sharing this, something so personal, with Arthur felt surprisingly natural. Perhaps it was the robe, the informality of the morning, or perhaps it was just the right time, the right person. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face. A musician, he said, a note of interest in his voice. Martha loved music too. Big band, mostly. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman. We used to go dancing, when we were younger. She was light as a feather on her feet. A wistful look came over his face, a journey back in time visible in his eyes. I can almost picture it, I said, smiling. Did you have a favorite song you danced to? His eyes lit up. Moonlight Serenade, he said without hesitation. That was our song. Whenever it played, no matter where we were, we'd find a way to dance, even if it was just a little shuffle in the living room. He demonstrated with a small movement of his shoulders, a ghostly echo of a dance step. It was endearing. This was a side of Arthur Jenkins I'd never imagined. The quiet, reserved man from across the street had a history filled with love, music, and dancing. It was a reminder that everyone carries a whole world within them, a world often hidden from casual view. That's a beautiful memory, Arthur. I said, thank you for sharing it. Thank you for listening, Eleanor. He replied, It's it's been a while since I've talked about her like this. The children, they mean well, but they get sad. And then I feel I have to be strong for them. And friends, well, most of our old friends are gone now, or in their own worlds. He looked down at his hands, clasped loosely in his lap. It's good to just talk. Sometimes that's all we need, isn't it? I said, a listening ear, a shared moment. We lapsed into a comfortable silence again. The sun had climbed higher, and the room was filled with a warm, gentle light. The little Haworthia seemed to glow on the table. I found myself tracing the rim of my coffee mug, thinking about the unexpected turns life can take. Just an hour ago, I'd been contemplating a quiet Saturday of solitude. Now, my living room felt different, fuller. It wasn't just me and the ticking clock anymore. There was a shared warmth, a nascent friendship. Her other collections, I prompted gently, remembering his earlier words. You said she had others. Arthur's face brightened a little. Oh, yes, She did. Nothing valuable, mind you, not in monetary terms, but precious to her. She collected thimbles from all the places we ever visited and places friends went. She had a whole display case full of them, each one with a tiny story. Thimbles, I exclaimed. How charming. My grandmother used to collect them too. I always loved looking at the tiny pictures on them. Did she? Arthur leaned forward slightly, a new spark of connection. Martha would have liked that. She also collected, well, this is a bit silly. Perhaps she collected unusual buttons. She had jars of them. She'd say every button had a history, a garment it once belonged to, an occasion it had witnessed. That's not silly at all. I said, it's wonderfully imaginative. It's like seeing the poetry in everyday things. He nodded, pleased. Poetry in everyday things. Yes, that's a good way to put it. Martha would have liked that phrase too. He paused. Then a hesitant look crossed his face. I I was wondering, Eleanor, I know this is asking a lot after I've already imposed on your morning, but some of her button jars, they're just sitting there. I don't know what to do with them. The children wouldn't want them. Would you perhaps like to see them sometime? Maybe you could even, I don't know, find a use for some of them? If you're crafty at all. His request hung in the air. It was more than just about buttons, I knew. It was an invitation to step further into his world, to share more of Martha's legacy, and perhaps to help him navigate this new, lonelier chapter of his life. It was also an opportunity for me, a chance to deepen this unexpected connection. My own life, while peaceful, had its quiet stretches, moments where I missed the easy companionship Robert had provided. Arthur, I said, a warm smile spreading across my face. I would be delighted to see Martha's button collection. And yes, I do dabble in a bit of crafting now. And then, perhaps we could even think of a little project to do with them, something to honor her memory. His relief was palpable. Oh, Eleanor, that would be that would be wonderful, truly wonderful. He drained his coffee cup and set it carefully on the coaster. I feel lighter, he said, almost to himself, just talking about her, sharing these things. It's like opening a window in a stuffy room. I knew exactly what he meant. And as I looked at him, at this kind, gentle man who had knocked on my door in his moment of quiet need, I felt a window opening in my own life too, letting in a breath of fresh air and the promise of a new, unexpected friendship. The old chenille, Robe, suddenly didn't feel quite so old, and the Saturday morning felt brighter than it had in a very long time. The you won't believe what happened wasn't some grand dramatic event. It was this quiet, profound unfolding, this gentle collision of two solitary lives, finding solace and connection in the most unexpected of ways. The rest of that Saturday unfolded with a gentle rhythm that was new and yet felt entirely natural. After our second cups of coffee, Arthur, with a newfound lightness in his step, excused himself, promising to bring over a few of Martha's button jars later in the week, perhaps on Wednesday afternoon, if that suited me. It did. We walked to the door, and as he stepped out onto the porch, he turned back. Eleanor, he said, his pale blue eyes sincere, thank you for the coffee, for listening, for everything. Thank you, Arthur, I replied, meaning it just as much, for trusting me with Martha's little star and for sharing her stories. He gave a small, almost shy nod, and then, with a wave, he walked back across the street, his posture a little straighter than when he'd arrived. I watched him go, then closed the door, a soft smile playing on my lips. The house didn't feel quite so empty. The little Haworthia sat on the side table, a quiet green presence, already feeling like a part of the room, a tiny anchor for this new connection. The rest of my day was spent in a sort of pleasant haze. I did eventually tackle the crossword, but my mind kept drifting back to my conversation with Arthur. I thought about Martha, a woman I'd known only superficially, yet now felt a kinship with through her husband's memories and her small, cherished possessions. I thought about the surprising intimacy of our exchange, how two people, neighbors for decades, could suddenly find such common ground, such easy understanding. It was a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, there are always currents of deeper feeling, of shared human experience, waiting to be discovered. Later that afternoon, I found the perfect spot for the Haworthia. It was on the windowsill in my small sunroom at the back of the house, a room I often used for reading and quiet contemplation. It would get the gentle morning sun Martha had prescribed, and it was surrounded by my other, more subdued plants, a collection of jade plants, a rather stoic-looking aloe, and a trailing string of pearls. It looked right at home there. As I watered it, I found myself humming a little tune, something I hadn't done in ages. I even said a few words to it. Welcome to your new home. Little star, I hope you'll be happy here. It felt a bit silly, but also rather nice. The following days passed with a subtle shift in their texture. I found myself looking across the street more often, noticing the lights on in Arthur's house in the evening, wondering what he was doing. It wasn't a prying curiosity, but a gentle awareness, a feeling of connection that hadn't been there before. On Wednesday afternoon, true to his word, Arthur knocked on my door again. This time, I was dressed, though I greeted him with the same warm smile. He carried a small cardboard box, and his nervousness from the previous visit was gone, replaced by a quiet anticipation. Come in, Arthur, I said. I've just put the kettle on. Tea or coffee today? Tea would be lovely, Eleanor. Thank you, he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. We settled in the living room again, and he carefully placed the box on the coffee table. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were 3 large glass jars, each filled to the brim with buttons of every imaginable size, shape, color, and material. There were mother-of-pearl buttons, tiny jet black ones, bright plastic daisies from the 60s, ornate brass military buttons, and simple wooden toggles. It was a kaleidoscope of miniature histories. Oh, Arthur, I breathed, genuinely captivated. They're wonderful, a treasure trove. He beamed, his pleasure evident. Martha would spend hours sorting them, arranging them by color or material. Sometimes she'd just run her hands through them, like a child with a chest of jewels. He picked up a particularly beautiful one, a deep sapphire blue glass button with a silver inlay. This one, he said, his voice soft with memory, was from a dress she wore on our 25th anniversary. We went to a fancy restaurant downtown. She looked so beautiful that night. His eyes misted over for a moment, but he blinked it away, offering me a gentle smile. She kept everything. We spent the next hour looking through the buttons, Arthur sharing little anecdotes connected to some of them, me marveling at the variety and artistry. It wasn't just about the buttons. It was about the stories they held, the life they represented. It was a way for Arthur to share Martha, to keep her memory alive, not just in his heart, but with someone else who could appreciate her quiet passions. As we sifted through the colorful array, I felt a deep sense of privilege. He was entrusting me with these small, intimate pieces of his past, of his love story. It was a profoundly emotional experience, not in a dramatic, tearful way, but in a quiet, deeply resonant manner. There was a mutual respect that flowed between us, an understanding that transcended the ordinary neighborly acquaintance. I found myself learning so much about him, about Martha, about the enduring power of love and memory. You know, Arthur, I said, picking up a handful of small, mismatched floral buttons, I have an idea. I have an old plain quilted throw. It's a bit boring, actually. Perhaps we could sew some of these onto it, create a sort of memory quilt. Something beautiful and useful, a way to give these buttons a new life while honoring Martha. His face lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. Eleanor, that's that's a wonderful idea. Martha would have loved that. She was always making things, repurposing things. He hesitated, then asked, would you let me help? My eyesight isn't what it used to be for fine needlework, but I could sort buttons, maybe even manage some of the larger ones. Of course, Arthur, I said warmly. I wouldn't dream of doing it without you. We can make it a joint project. And so, a new routine began to establish itself. Once or twice a week, Arthur would come over, sometimes with another jar of buttons, sometimes just for a cup of tea and a chat. We started working on the memory quilt, my living room, once the domain of my solitary pursuits, now often echoed with his quiet chuckles, with our shared reminiscences as we chose buttons and decided on their placement. My old chenille robe still made its appearance on Saturday mornings, but now those mornings sometimes included a friendly wave to Arthur across the street, or even a shared coffee on my porch if the weather was fine. The subtle tension of that first unexpected knock had long since dissolved, replaced by an easy camaraderie, a comfortable, respectful friendship that had blossomed in the most unexpected way. It was a personal discovery for both of us, I think. For Arthur, it was a way to navigate his grief, to find connection and purpose. For me, it was a delightful surprise, a reminder that life can always offer new joys, new friendships, even when you think you're settled into your quiet groove. The "you won't believe what happened" wasn't just about a knock on the door. It was about opening the door, literally and figuratively, to a deeper, more meaningful connection with the world around me, starting with the man who lived just across the street. It was about the quiet magic of shared stories and the enduring beauty of small, cherished things. Our button project became a gentle centerpiece to our weekly meetings. The plain, cream-colored throw I'd unearthed from the linen closet began to bloom with color and texture. We'd sit, often in comfortable silence, sometimes with soft classical music playing in the background. I discovered Arthur had a fondness for Chopin and sort through the jars. He had a surprisingly good eye for color combinations, often pointing out a button I might have overlooked that would be perfect for a particular spot. My needle, though not as swift as it once was, moved steadily, stitching these tiny fragments of Martha's life, and now Arthur's, into a new tapestry. Each button seemed to whisper its own story as I sewed it on. A small, pearly one from a baby's christening gown, Arthur had told me, belonging to their daughter. A sturdy, leather-bound one from an old gardening jacket Martha had worn till it frayed. A gaudy, sparkling one she bought on a whim on a seaside holiday, just because it made her laugh. It wasn't just a quilt we were making. It was a chronicle, a tangible collection of memories. Through these sessions, I learned more about Arthur's life before Martha's passing. He'd been an engineer, meticulous and thoughtful, qualities I could see in the careful way he handled the buttons and considered their placement. He spoke of their travels, not grand adventures, but quiet explorations of nearby towns, visits to botanical gardens, and annual trips to a small coastal village where Martha loved to collect seashells, another of her quiet passions. He even brought over a small box of her most treasured shells one afternoon, each one perfect and unique, and we found a way to incorporate a few tiny ones into the quilt's border, nestled amongst the buttons like hidden jewels. My daughter, Sarah, called me one Saturday morning. "Mom, you sound different," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "Happier. What's going on?" I smiled into the phone, glancing at the little Haworthia on the sunroom windowsill, which was thriving. "Oh, nothing much, dear," I said. "Just made a new friend. That's all." I told her about Arthur, about Martha's plant, and our button quilt. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's really nice, Mom. I'm glad." I think she understood, more than words could say, that this newfound connection was filling a space in my life I hadn't even consciously acknowledged was empty. The quilt grew, stitch by stitch, button by button. It became a riot of color and memory, a testament to a life well lived and a love well remembered. And as it grew, so did our friendship. Arthur was no longer just Mr. Jenkins from across the street. He was Arthur, my friend, a kind and gentle soul with a surprising wit and a deep capacity for love. He started bringing over little things. A particularly interesting article from the newspaper he thought I'd enjoy, a bloom from his own struggling rose bush, which I gave him some tips on reviving, once even a small, slightly lopsided apple pie he'd attempted to bake himself, a tribute to Martha's culinary skills. It wasn't the best pie I'd ever tasted, but it was made with such affection that it was delicious in its own way. I, in turn, would share freshly baked cookies or a new book I thought he might like. Our interactions were simple, unassuming, yet deeply fulfilling. There was no pretense, no agenda, just mutual respect and a genuine enjoyment of each other's company. The initial vulnerability I'd felt that first morning, standing there in my robe, had transformed into a comfortable openness. We could talk about anything: current events, memories of our spouses, the changing seasons, the small joys